Well, you're welcome again to Travel First. And when I say welcome, we've got Chris Coleman in the background, but behind Chris, I think he's reverted to childhood. No, maybe baby years. Why have we got all these nappies behind you, Chris? I mean, this is ridiculous. You're on a cruise in the middle of the Caribbean somewhere, and you got this store of nappies that would do Kmart or Target proud.
This is where we can now see that you're not a cruise person, Alex, because what we have behind me is what they do. They do towel art for you in your room. And every couple of days,
Towel
on
art.
a cruise like this, yeah, you come back in, and every couple of days, you'll have towels folded up into, for instance, a chicken or a cat or a mouse or a hippopotamus, or in that case, it's an unidentified sea creature. I think it's a lobster, but I'm not 100% sure on that one. I'm not a great expert of towel art.
They've got far too much time on their hands. That's what it says. Very, very... No, it's a nice touch. That goes very nicely.
We're keeping them as a menagerie, yes.
Yeah, it goes very nicely with the shirt you were wearing in the last episode of Travel First. I like it. Now, you've stopped off at Moorea, and I was aware prior to you mentioning this to me of Moorea, but I know nothing about it, having not been there. So perhaps you can give us a little bit of a pen portrait.
Look, we can talk about Moorea today, and on a future edition we'll talk about Papeete and Tahiti. They're two of the three destination islands in French Polynesia. Now, French Polynesia, it's a collectivity of France. They took over the 121 islands in 1842. There's a population spread across 75 of those islands of about 300,000 people. And like I said, you've got three popular destination islands. So there's Moorea, there's Bora Bora, and there's Papeete, with the city on the island of Tahiti. We were meant to go to Bora Bora.
How far apart are they, Chris? How far apart one from the other?
Bora Bora's quite away, for like sort of 30 or 40 k's away. But Tahiti and Moorea are in. You can actually see from one to the other. So it's about 30 k's to travel by sea. It was an overnight trip for us from Moorea to Tahiti at a very, very slow rate. And I suspect we'd actually docked several hours in Tahiti before anyone was allowed off the ship, but I was sleeping because it was dark. So there you go.
Okay.
But today we're going to focus on Moorea, and as I said, it is one of the three popular destination islands in French Polynesia, and it is pronounced by the locals as Moorea, but it's a lot easier for those of us not of Polynesian descent to say Moorea, and that's what we're going to go with. Now, it's not a large island, about 16,000 people on an island that's, say, 65 kilometres around. And at its widest point, say, 10 miles, 16 kilometres across, but it is dominated by steep peaks. Mount Tohea is the tallest at 1,207 metres. There are several others above 800 metres, Mount Rotui at 899, Mount Mauaroa at 880, Mount Mauaputa at 830. And yes, I've been practising. And the other thing about the island is it is absolutely stunning.
Okay, now hang on. Let's pause for a moment. Let's pause. How many hours did you have on Moorea?
Moorea, we actually arrived early one morning. We stayed, we moored early in the morning. We stayed overnight and left late in the afternoon the very next day. Okay,
so that's what I suspected.
Plenty of time.
So plenty of time. So why? I mean, 1,200 metres or 1,200 feet? Did you say the tallest of these mountains?
No, 1,200 metres is the tallest of the mountains.
1,200 metres. Okay, and so 1,200 metres. Yeah. Well, Chris, come on. You had all day. You're now going to tell me you climbed to the top of the mountain with your wife, aren't you? That's the very least you could tell us.
No, one does not climb the mountains in Moorea.
One does not. And is there a reason one does not? Because, I mean, I tell you, while you've been away, there's been a remarkable feat by a young Aussie. I'm not sure whether you've heard this or not, but he has done 47 days in a row. He ran 100 kilometres. So he ran more than 2 marathons a day. Steve Monteghetti was in awe of what this guy has done. He's being touted as a future Australian of the Year. So for you to climb some 1,200 metres up and back, piece of cake. Why didn't you do it?
Yeah, no, it wasn't going to happen. It was never going to happen. And no, they don't even offer that to you as a tourist option. So we'll just move on at this point, shall we?
That's what it's all about, eh? Come on. You know, I want a story out of this trip.
Well,
It
look,
looks
I
good,
know
Mark.
you
By
are
the
not
way,
only
is that what I'm seeing? That 1,200-meter mountain or not in the background here?
no, that is one of the smaller ones. In fact, what you're
Is it?
looking at there
Okay.
to the left, to the left of that peak is Opanohu Bay. That's where we were moored. You can't see our ship because it's behind the very prominent peak. And then on the right of the screen is Cook's Bay. So they run parallel to each other, coming in from the island's north coast. Cook's Bay too was used as one of the filming locations for both Marlon Brando's Mutiny on the Bounty in the 1960s, which I'm sure you've seen, and Mel Gibson's The Bounty in the 1980s. Now, little side story. After Marlon Brando came out to film Mutiny on the Bounty, he fell in love with the area, signed a 99-year lease on 2 other islands in the group, and after he died, his estate established a resort there. It is insanely expensive. I had a look at the prices, and they were between, in US dollars, $3,000 and $5,000 a night for one of the smaller rooms.
Come on, you're a wealthy man. You can afford, take a 10-day little sojourn there, side trip, Chris.
Yeah, but the problem is the only way to get there is by the resort's private airline, and the air tickets are extra on top. So that was the deal breaker. That was the deal breaker.
Well, we tried. Now, fair enough.
We tried, and I wrote to them to see if they were able to do anything, and all I got was, "Are you talking to me?" Anyway, the cruise ships have been absent from Moorea, as with much of the world, for a couple of years, and we were told that Ovation of the Seas, which is the boat we're sailing on, was the second ship to arrive since the cruise industry restarted. We moored in the western of those 2 bays in Opanohu Bay, and as we came aboard, it is just an assault to the senses in a nice way. The scenery is stunning everywhere you look, and the locals were delighted to see the cruise ships back, because it's a regular stopping off point for Trans-Pacific cruise ships as they make their way from Hawaii to the Southern Pacific, and also vice versa. So they were delighted to have the cruise ships back.
What's there to buy there, Chris? When you wandered around, I mean, you've got a really ugly shirt from Hawaii. So what did you get here? I mean, were there grass skirts or something? I've got no idea, but I need to know what's the delicacy, or not even in food, but in terms of clothing or retail outlets. What did you do?
We went to the distillery, the Manatee Distillery, which makes a very nice rum, a very nice rum,
nice. Okay.
and a couple of very nice liqueurs as well. So now I must stress something here for people who aren't aware. When you're on a cruise ship, if you go ashore and you pick up alcohol on the off the cruise ship, when you come back on board, they will take it off you. You can't bring the alcohol on board to drink on the ship. They'll take it off you, and then you'll get it back on your last night before you go ashore at the end of your cruise, and you have to factor that into your duty-free allowance as well. So,
but the allowance isn't all that. The allowance isn't all that grand, is it? I mean, I'm a non-drinker, so it doesn't worry me at all. And I know when I've gone overseas, I bought my limit, to give to other people. But what is the limit now? Do you know?
The limit these days is 2.25 litres per person.
Okay.
And it doesn't matter whether that is litres of beer, litres of wine, litres of spirits. You can, they do tend to let you pool that allowance if you've got 2 people, if you're a couple, to 4.5 litres, which is respectable. Compare it to New Zealand, though. In New Zealand, I believe it is 3 litres and 30 cans of beer, or something along those lines. It is considerably larger. It varies. But
hang on, one of the things you said to me, one of the things that you mentioned to me at the when we were sort of preparing for this trip, is that it's no longer, for example, if you're going to buy duty free in Australia, it's not much different to buying at, say, Dan Murphy's or any of the other outlets.
No,
so,
it's not.
I mean, if that's the case, Chris, then surely you're better off doing what you've done and buying something on an island that you won't be able to get here in Australia. So at least you've got some sense of the exotic.
Also depends where you're shopping, Alex, because on board the ship, funnily enough, they also have duty-free stores, and the goods they sell there range from your regulation. Say, I'm a bourbon drinker. They have Jim Beam, white label bourbon. You can get 2 1-litre bottles of that for $50 American, which is about 75 Australian at the current exchange rate, which is probably about half the price you would wind up paying, or maybe a bit less. So maybe a bit more than half, but it's a considerable saving on what you'll pay at an Australian bottle shop. The savings aren't as great on the high-end liquor items, on the top shelf, like the very top shelf, Scotch whiskies and bourbons and tequilas that they sell.
But you need to know your pricing.
That's on many of them.
What you're saying to me is you need to know your prices before you go. I mean, it's interesting because the Aussie dollar, as we're speaking today, it's below 63 cents against US. So, in fact, it's probably even more of a saving, right? It's 62 point something. So this is the lowest it's been for a long, long time.
Yeah, before we left, it was down below 60 cents. So it's turned around.
Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. So talk to me a little bit more about Moorea. What else did you want to say to the viewers and the listeners?
Well, if you're looking to head around the island, the easiest way to see the island is to take a guided tour around the coast road. Now, again, when cruise ships pull in, and cruise ships are one of the easiest ways, the most likely way you're going to turn up at Moorea. Your cruise ship company and Royal Caribbean did have plenty of tours around to do the guided tour around the coast. There are also, the locals offer tours in small air-conditioned buses and vehicles. They cost, roughly speaking, $50 US. And they will divert to a couple of places.
Sorry, everything is US. Everything's US, is it? I mean, you quoted everything in US dollars. I understand. I mean, when you're traveling, that's quite common, but they're not quoting you Aussie dollars. Is that right?
The cruise ship currency is the US dollar, so it's a lot easier for us to deal in the US dollar. And even though we were told by several people before we went to Moorea and before we went to Tahiti that the locals would accept Australian dollars, they didn't. And that meant that the credit card got a little bit more of a workout in some places because I didn't have a lot of US dollars cash. I had a bit of Australian currency. Funnily enough, I still have a bit of Australian currency, but I have. Hang on, I can tell you exactly how much US currency I've got left because it fits in the palm of my hand. It's about 25 cents.
Right. What I was going to say to you, I'm not sure whether you're familiar with this, but there's been quite some controversy over the last few days here in Australia about the fact that if you use, this is in the United States, if you use ATMs, you're up for a lot of money in terms of taking US dollars out. So you're far better off getting, I'm not sure what it's called, but a travel card, sticking the US dollars on there and gradually letting that go down. So did you make the wrong choices? I mean, are you saying to me that you were obviously informed one way and it's turned out to be another? Should you have put more money onto a credit card or travel card, or what would you recommend people do?
Would have been more handy to have a little bit more cash in terms of American dollars.
Cash, okay.
Again, could have loaded some of that up onto as a Qantas frequent flyer. You can get a Qantas money card, and they will load that up for you. You can get money cards at your post office as well. The credit card has been very well accepted. There are surcharges. There's a couple of percent surcharge. I know that with one of the banks, or let me rephrase that, I'm fairly certain that there is at least one of the banks, not necessarily one of the big fours, but one of the banks that if you have several accounts with them and you go to an overseas ATM, they will cover the fees. The best advice I would give is say to your bank, I'm going overseas. I would like you to actually tell me what I'm going to be up for. And they will give you the best advice because it will vary widely from bank to bank and even from time to time, I would suspect.
I want to ask you another question. These are a couple of issues to do with travel that have come up in Australia over the last few days. The other one is tipping. Okay, so I know we've talked about that in the past, but it's in the United States, there's an expectation, right? That in fact, they put it onto the bill.
Yep.
You don't have a choice. That started happening in Australia. I'm not sure whether you're aware of that. If you go to a restaurant and some restaurants are now putting 10 or 15% onto the bill, you don't have a choice. You don't, and being Aussies, we're not used to it, and there's been a bit of pushback. So when you have a meal on board the ship because you've bought a package and you've upgraded, you said that to me at some point, better meals and so forth. Now, I presume there's only an expectation at the end of the cruise that you give the kitchen and everybody associated with it a tip. Surely you're not going to be tipping every single time. Otherwise, you're up for a lot of money. Tell me whether I'm right or wrong.
I tell you what I would do, and I will do this on the next segment because I'll need to dive into the safe to pull out some receipts, that many things on board the cruise ship actually have an 18% gratuity built in to the price tag automatically. So it's not added on top, it's built into the price. So that is just assumed. Having said that, if you go, and but the thing is, say something costs, say a meal at the steakhouse costs you $65 US, that is $65 including the 18% gratuity.
Yeah,
now, if you that then gets shared amongst all the staff in that area of the ship. If you particularly wish to tip your server, you can go if they've gone above and beyond. You can then add another amount on top as a tip. And yes, on some occasions on board the ship, we have certainly experienced service that has been above and beyond. And so as a result, we have tipped an additional amount.
But Chris, I'm still unclear on this then. So if a steak is $65 and it includes the 18%, if you ask, if you see a menu, does it say $65 or does it give you the figure less? Oh, it does. Okay, so up front.
It says $65. Yeah. On board the ship, they're upfront about that the price. It's the same with the drinks. If you have a cocktail by the pool, it is, say, $13 inclusive of the 18% gratuity. But if you wish to tip over that amount, again, you can tip over that amount.
So I'm wrong then in saying that at the end of the cruise, if you add some figures, that would, I suppose if you added something at the end of the cruise, that would be split amongst the kitchen hands. Is that right? Or the people who serve?
If you wish to, and now every room on a cruise ship has a stateroom attendant who comes in and cleans your room on a daily basis and tidies things up and gives you the new towels, etc. And there is somewhat of a tradition to pop some money in an envelope and leave it for your cabin room attendant at the end of the cruise. That amount of that will vary depending on how much you wish to give them. Again, on Royal Caribbean, they say gratuities are included, but again, if you wish to tip for exceptional service, then you can do so.
Do you think there's an expectation, though, Chris? Did you think that? I mean, I asked this quite seriously. Is there an expectation? Because it's almost like, okay, you're loading something by 18%. Let's make it easy. Let's say 20%. So everything's loaded by 20% anyway, and yet I get the impression that most people would expect, like the room attendant or whatever, that you would give above that. Is that true or not?
Bear in mind, many of the people who work on board cruise ships are young, especially those people who work in the room service area. They are young. They may have families at home in less well-to-do countries, and they are away from home for a very long time. I'm talking some of these people will be away from home for 6, 8, 10 months at a time, traveling the world on cruise ships, seeing to the beck and call of everybody. I think they probably deserve a little bit extra over and above that you determine on their level of service.
So in other words, all I'm saying
having
is,
said that,
you don't have to. I understand, but I mean, the point I'm making here is that you've got to allow for that in terms of the cost of a cruise, right? Or whether it's the cost of a cruise, or if you're going to America or going to these places, that there's an expectation, and you need to build that into your budget. That's all I'm saying. I don't say there's anything wrong with it, but if you go along expecting the figure that you originally thought to be all you're paying, that's not true for the vast majority of us.
Look, you'd need to factor it into your spending money. And I think Australia is one of the few countries in the world where tipping isn't a regular occurrence. New Zealand is similar. But in many other countries around the world, tipping is de rigueur. I don't think Australia necessarily needs to go into tipping as a regular thing because we pay our hospitality staff a living wage. But again, if service is particularly good, I'll tip. And I'll do that in Australia. If service is particularly good when I'm in the United States or other places, I will tip more.
Well, it's interesting. The only other conversation point that for now that I'd like to raise with you is what's been going on, and Qantas has been singled out here, but I don't think they're Robinson Crusoe. The cost of airfares, and look, they've lost billions, let's be honest, during COVID, but it's seen as price gouging at the moment. And if you, at short notice, want to go business class to London and places like that, you can be paying upwards of, and there have been radio reports in the last few days, $20,000, Chris. I mean, wow.
Yep.
Like, wow. I'm staggered when I hear some of these figures. And I understand they're trying to recoup a lot of these lost earnings and so on. I mean, Qantas has really been battered, but they've also, in terms of customer service and, what's gone wrong and baggage handlers and so forth, I think it's been a PR disaster over the last 6 months. I think it's been shocking. So, this isn't going to win them friends or influence people by charging these amounts of money, but that's been hugely talked about in Australia. So what's your view?
When we get back to Sydney, I've got to get back to Canberra, and I can tell you that we had a number of things that were, pardon the pun, up in the air about what was going to happen after we arrived in Sydney before we had to return to Canberra. When that all finally settled in place, we thought, okay, we'll fly back from Sydney to Canberra. Mm-hmm. Very little change out of $450 for
what does it normally cost?
Individual economy class ticket. In days gone by, tickets are about $100. So to get $400 plus dollars for a ticket was a little shock to the system. But
so do you think that's
in
fair?
The end, it was a decision we had to make.
Do you think that's fair given what they've gone through, or do you think it's priced out? I mean, it's a serious question because I fully, we want Qantas to exist. Please don't get me wrong. I've loved the airline and I've used the airline a lot. We've both got Qantas cards. I think it's great. But boy, oh boy, for people who've done it tough, it's not just Qantas that's done it tough. A lot of other people have done it tough too. I reckon they're stretching friendships and also really not. It's almost like, when customers complain, they push back on the complaints or say, well, that's not customers should be more this, more that. That's not the way that I would have handled the situation going back over the past few months. I don't think they've won a lot of friends and influenced people. I think the status of the airline has taken a tumble, and I understand why. And I'm not out to condemn them. I don't. I hope that things improve as time goes on again, because I was really proud. I vividly remember, and I've spoken to you about this on a number of occasions, when I've been, this is going back years now, but when I step back onto a Qantas jet and hear the Aussie accent, I love it. I absolutely love it. And, greeted beautifully, and the attendants are fantastic, etc. And I took great pride and pleasure in getting back on a Qantas jet. That's what I want to get back to, where we are proud of our airline, Chris.
Yep. I think you summed it all up nicely, Alex. The only other thing I'll throw in is that there has been a lot of talk about executive pay levels at Qantas, and in some media reporting, and I'm sure it's largely correct, the suggestions have been that the executives have not really suffered much in terms of pay, and indeed have even received pay rises. Shareholders, I understand there are shareholders. Shareholders have also still received dividends, and the share price has been protected. But the employees at the coalface have really copped a beating. There are many of them who've lost their jobs. There's been restructuring of the corporate structure to actually reduce the amount of money that's being paid out in wages. And I think you're right. It has been handled very badly in many ways. And I think Qantas is not as highly regarded an airline globally as it was even 5 years ago.
Yeah, and I'm genuinely hoping we can turn that around as a country and as an airline. And I think it takes both sides, because if there's improvement, I'm sure that people are going to sort of stroke them rather than hit them. And at the moment, and the baggage was a huge issue, getting rid of baggage handlers and then hiring outside contractors. And then, there was a lot of backlash there. And then you heard the cases of people who never got their bags at all, or were waiting weeks and weeks. On top of that, you had the passport fiasco, which you spoke about. So there's been all sorts of reasons. Now, I understand when you're restarting something, there's going to be teething problems, but don't blame us. I mean, that's the thing that to me is wrong. We're trying to do our very best. And, I mean, what more can we as mere mortals, as mere travellers do, other than to pay our money and have an expectation of a good experience? And when the experience isn't good, well, guess what you're going to get? you're going to get slapped, and that's what's happened. So anyway, Qantas, let's hope for their sake and for us as a country that we can get back to seeing them as one of the great airlines of the world, because it will be good for everybody. Gets back to let's talk a little bit more and finish off now with Moorea, because I know we've deviated, but that's the nature of our conversations. In terms of
it happens.
Would you have liked to have spent more time there, or was the sort of several hours that you had there enough to get a bit of a sneak peek? And would you go back?
There is accommodation there, and what I'll say is it's a place to get away from it all. There are sights to see. For instance, one of the places we saw, the remains of an ancient Tahitian temple, which had candle nut trees growing around it. Candle nuts, by the way, they're great. They're the fruits, the green fruits, and you can pick them. You can stick a wick in it, and you can light it, and it'll burn for hours like a candle. Hence the name candle nut. There are chickens running wild and free.
Is that what we're seeing here?
For those on the video, yeah, that's a candle nut, and that is actually the ancient Tahitian temple, or the remains thereof. With the candle nut trees growing in and around it, which is
so you can't
fabulous.
Eat them. You can't eat those things.
No, I'm told they're mildly toxic, so I wouldn't be trying.
Okay, right. No,
just back to
don't try that at home.
yeah,
right. Okay.
Just back to the view that view that I showed earlier. This one here. This is from the Belvedere. That's a lookout, and that is one of the best views on the island. But there is also. Now, that is the Sofitel Resort. So Sofitel has a resort there, and those are overwater bungalows. I'm told they're very popular with honeymooners. I don't know why, but they're very popular with honeymooners. I looked at prices for those. Depending on which island, you can pay $1,000 to $1,500 per night, and that was in Australian dollars. But there are resorts with similar facilities on several islands around French Polynesia. So if you're
half expect to see the Rock
for someone to get away from it all, I would recommend it.
I just expect to see Dwayne Johnson somewhere, because he makes movies in places like this. So I reckon somehow expect him to duck around that tree, that beautiful tree that I reckon be. Okay, hang on. What do we got here? We've got a very nice looking tree, and. Who's this bloke looking decidedly concerned, looking at his face?
He's a tour guide.
Is he? Okay.
So he's a tour guide. And
he's wearing
one of the things I loved about it.
Now,
have you been to Spain? Have you been to Valencia in Spain, where they have the Valencia orange trees growing down the street? And
no, I haven't. I've been to Spain, but not there. No, I haven't.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, in Moorea, they have almond trees that are growing almonds in the street, and our tour guide actually picked a few up off the ground, smashed them open with a rock, and lo and behold, fresh almonds straight off the tree. Absolutely delicious. So,
you can taste the difference from the ones that you buy in packets in supermarkets.
Oh yeah, these things are absolutely the freshness is just so much stronger flavour, and just to see them going wild on the roadsides in various places around the island.
So is that one of the trees where they grow? Is that right? Is that orange?
That is an almond tree. Yeah, with the orangey plumage. Yeah, that's an almond tree. So, and they fall off, and when they fall off, they're ripe and they're ready to eat. So there you go. So
fantastic.
And as I said, it is. You can look across, and rather foolishly, I didn't actually put in a photo of this, but just off to the left of that, you can see on the photo of the resort where the water changes colour. Just off to the left of that picture is where the island of Tahiti actually starts to come into view. So you can see it across there, and to get backwards and forwards while a major sports event with the region, and they used to show this on Channel 9's Wide Water Sports back in the day, the canoe race between Moorea and Tahiti. It's about it's a decent old canoe race. For the locals, it's much more comfortable. They have fast ferries which you go backwards and forwards. If you're in the area in a rental car, you can take the car on the ferry. Depending on which one, they have ferries that take between 30 and 50 minutes. They also have flights, little island hopper flights that take about 10 minutes that run every hour or so during daylight. So you can fly backwards and forwards as well. I would recommend Moorea if you want to get away from it all and you're quite content to just sit there in a resort looking at magnificent scenery. You could spend a week here, no problem. If you're more like me, you probably spend a couple of days here. You'd then want to go across to Papeete and then maybe go to Bora Bora for a few nights and make it a real a real experience. And next time we talk, Alex, we will talk about Papeete, the city, and Tahiti Island as well.
Oh, that's terrific. Chris, it's been a pleasure speaking to you about all sorts of things, and continue to enjoy your 19 days at sea. And we'll hear more from Chris Coleman and co. on the next edition of Travel First.